The transport shuttle shuddered as it docked with Galactic Defense Station Omega-7, its metallic hull groaning against the massive alien structure. Gathered his diplomatic briefcase and straightened his simple gray uniform, checking his appearance one final time in the shuttle's reflective window. The human delegation had sent him here to negotiate mining rights in the Outer Rim territories, a routine assignment that should have been straightforward. As the airlock hissed open, stepped into the station's main corridor and immediately felt the weight of dozens of alien eyes upon him. The corridor buzzed with activity as various species moved about their duties, but conversations seemed to quiet as the human diplomat passed by. Towering warriors with their crystalline armor plates clicked their mandibles in what recognized as barely concealed amusement. A group of reptilian soldiers stopped their weapon maintenance to stare, their forked tongues flicking out to taste the air around him. "Look what the transport dragged in," rumbled a massive officer, his rocky hide from countless battles. The creature stood nearly 3 meters tall, his 4 arms crossed over a chest that could have served as a bunker wall. Another soft-skinned human thinking he can play with the real soldiers. Nodded politely to thee and continued walking, but the alien's words had already sparked a ripple of laughter throughout the corridor. With her gossamer wings and ethereal beauty floated past, her melodic voice carrying clearly through the air. "I heard humans still use projectile weapons. How primitive. Do they expect to fight the Devourers with metal pellets?" The mention of the Devourers sent a brief chill through the corridor, but it was quickly replaced by renewed mockery directed at the human diplomat. Had read the files about this mysterious enemy force that had been raiding Outer Rim colonies, but the galactic military seemed confident in their technological superiority. Advanced energy shields, plasma cannons, and faster-than-light communication networks gave them every advantage over any conventional threat. "Human military doctrine is laughable," declared a commander, his equine lower body clopping against the metal decking as he approached his subordinates. "They still believe in ground invasions and close-quarters combat. In the age of orbital bombardment and antimatter weapons, such tactics are completely obsolete." Reached the security checkpoint where a bored-looking guard processed his credentials. The being's compound eyes reflected the human's image dozens of times as he scanned the diplomatic papers with obvious disinterest. "Purpose of visit," the guard droned in galactic standard. "Trade negotiations regarding mining operations in sectors 7 through 12, replied calmly, though he could still hear the muffled laughter from the soldiers behind him. "I'm scheduled to meet with Commander 9 in Conference Room Beta." The handed back his papers with a dismissive gesture. "Level 15, Section C. Try not to get lost, human. The corridors here are designed for beings with actual spatial intelligence." More chuckles rippled through the nearby troops as thanked the guard and headed toward the elevator bank. A group of young recruits had gathered near the transport tubes, their crystalline shells gleaming under the station's artificial lights. They spoke in hushed tones, but their words carried clearly in the thin station atmosphere. "Did you see how small he is? I've heard human bones are so fragile they break from simple falls. My instructor told me that humans require constant atmospheric regulation to survive. They cannot even breathe properly without mechanical assistance in most environments. And they reproduce so slowly. A single clutch contains more offspring than an entire human settlement produces in a full cycle." Stepped into the elevator alongside several alien officers who made no effort to hide their amusement at his presence. The lift was clearly designed for larger species, leaving the human diplomat standing barely chest-high to most of his fellow passengers. A colonel looked down at him with obvious pity, shaking his massive reptilian head. "No offense intended, human, but your species seems poorly suited for galactic military service. Perhaps you would be better served focusing on agricultural development or artistic endeavors." "None taken," replied evenly, watching the floor indicators climb toward level 15. "Every species contributes what they can to galactic civilization." The snorted, a sound like steam escaping from a pressure valve. "True enough, though I struggle to imagine what military contribution humans could possibly make. Your vessels are slow, your weapons are primitive, and your soldiers are physically inferior to virtually every other spacefaring race." The elevator stopped at level 12, and most of the alien officers disembarked, still chuckling among themselves about the fragile human diplomat. Rode the final 3 levels in blessed silence, using the time to review his negotiation strategy and center his thoughts. The mining rights discussion would be challenging enough without the additional distraction of constant mockery from the station's military personnel. When the doors opened on level 15, found himself in a much quieter corridor lined with conference rooms and administrative offices. The soft hum of air recyclers and data processors created a more peaceful atmosphere than the boisterous military levels below. He located conference room beta and checked his chronometer, nodding that he had arrived precisely on time for his appointment. Through the transparent aluminum windows of the conference room, could see Commander 9 reviewing holographic displays of mining survey data. The officer's tentacled head swayed back and forth as he absorbed information from multiple data streams simultaneously. His species was renowned for their analytical capabilities and attention to detail, making them natural administrators for complex trade negotiations. Knocked politely on the door frame and waited for acknowledgement before entering. Commander 9 looked up from his displays and gestured toward a chair that had been adjusted to accommodate human proportions. The thoughtful gesture was a welcome change from the casual dismissal he had encountered elsewhere on the station. "Ambassador, welcome to Station Omega 7. I trust your journey from Earth was comfortable." The commander's voice carried a slight electronic undertone from his universal translator, but his tone seemed genuinely courteous. "Very comfortable, thank you. I appreciate you taking time from your duties to discuss these mining proposals." Settled into his chair and activated his own holographic display unit, projecting detailed surveys of the contested asteroid fields onto the conference table. Commander 9's tentacles writhed slightly as he processed the human data, his large eyes reflecting the swirling patterns of mineral distribution charts and extraction timeline projections. "Your species has certainly done thorough preparatory work. These surveys are quite comprehensive, though I notice your proposed extraction methods rely heavily on manual labor rather than automated systems. Human miners prefer hands-on techniques that allow for real-time quality assessment and adaptive problem-solving," explained, highlighting specific sections of the mining plans. "We find that automated systems sometimes miss valuable secondary deposits that experienced workers can identify and extract efficiently." The commander's head tentacles curved in what recognized as a gesture of polite skepticism. "Interesting approach, though I wonder about the safety implications. The outer rim territories can be quite dangerous, especially with recent devourer raids disrupting shipping lanes and communication networks." As if summoned by the mention of the mysterious enemy, alarms suddenly began blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights bathed the conference room in pulsing red illumination, while automated announcements echoed through the corridors in multiple languages. Commander 9's tentacles stiffened with alarm as he accessed his command interface, streams of tactical data flooding his displays. "Unknown fleet detected approaching from Galactic Northwest. Configuration suggests Devourer raiding force. All personnel report to battle stations immediately." Watched as the commander's demeanor shifted from courteous administrator to focused military leader. The transformation was remarkable, revealing the steel beneath the diplomatic veneer that had made his species such effective galactic peacekeepers. Around them, the station shuddered slightly as defensive systems came online and shield generators reached full power. "Ambassador, I must ask you to proceed to the civilian evacuation areas immediately. This negotiation will need to continue once we have dealt with this threat." Commander 9 was already rising from his chair, his multiple appendages dancing across control interfaces with practiced efficiency. "Of course, Commander. Is there anything I can do to assist?" The paused for a moment, one tentacle curled in what interpreted as polite amusement. "I appreciate the offer, but this is a military matter best left to trained professionals. Your evacuation pod will ensure your safety until the situation is resolved." As gathered his diplomatic materials, he could hear the thunderous footsteps of alien soldiers rushing to their posts throughout the station. The mockery and laughter from earlier had been replaced by grim determination as the reality of combat approached. Through the conference room windows, he could see transport shuttles launching from the docking bays, their engines blazing as they moved to intercept the approaching threat. The station's defensive batteries were already tracking targets beyond visual range, their massive turrets rotating with mechanical precision as targeting computers calculated firing solutions. Energy readings spiked throughout the station as shield generators and weapon systems drew power from the primary reactors, creating a subtle vibration that could be felt through the deck plating. Made his way toward the evacuation areas, but he could not shake the feeling that this attack was more than just another routine raid. The Devourers had been growing bolder in recent months, striking deeper into galactic territory with increasingly sophisticated tactics. Perhaps the alien military's confidence in their technological superiority was about to be tested in ways they had not anticipated. The evacuation deck buzzed with controlled chaos as civilian personnel from dozens of species gathered near the emergency pods. Found himself herded into a staging area with other non-military visitors, including trade representatives, diplomatic staff, and a handful of researchers who had been studying alien artifacts in the station's science laboratories. A towering security officer supervised the evacuation procedures, his booming voice cutting through the ambient noise as he directed people toward their assigned pods. Humans in Pod 7, in Pod 12, mixed species groups follow the blue guidance lines to Pods 15 through 20. Noticed how the alien security teams handled the human evacuees with extra care, as if they were dealing with particularly fragile cargo. One guard actually offered to carry an elderly human researcher's equipment bag, explaining that the artificial gravity might be too stressful for human physiology during the evacuation process. Standard procedure, the guard explained to his partner, loud enough for everyone to hear. Human bone density is insufficient for rapid acceleration cycles. Their cardiovascular systems cannot handle the same G-forces that other species consider routine. Through the massive viewing ports that lined the evacuation deck, could see the first wave of galactic fighters launching to meet the approaching Devourer fleet. The sleek vessels moved with incredible speed, their plasma drives leaving brilliant streaks of light against the starfield. Advanced sensors tracked dozens of targets moving in complex formation patterns that spoke of sophisticated tactical coordination. A flight commander stood near one of the viewing ports, addressing a group of junior officers who had gathered to observe the deployment. His reptilian features were animated with excitement as he gestured toward the distant battle formation. Watch how our interceptors maintain perfect formation spacing while executing those spiral approach vectors. No primitive enemy force could possibly counter such advanced maneuvering. The Devourers may have numbers, but we have technology they cannot even comprehend. Found himself assigned to Evacuation Pod 7 alongside 12 other humans, including several trade negotiators and a small family of agricultural specialists who had been touring the station's hydroponics facilities. The pod's automated systems activated as soon as all passengers were secured, running through pre-flight diagnostics while mechanical arms sealed the launch tube. The pod's pilot was a young officer whose compound eyes reflected nervous energy as he monitored the tactical displays. His features twitched with each status update from the station's command center, and could see sweat beading on his chitinous forehead despite the climate-controlled environment. "First time in actual combat?" asked Dr. Sarah Martinez, one of the human agricultural specialists. She had noticed the pilot's obvious anxiety and spoke with the kind of gentle authority that came from years of working with nervous students. "Yes, honored passenger. Training simulations are quite different from genuine battle scenarios." The translator unit rendered his clicks and buzzes into nervous galactic standard. "Though our defensive systems are more than adequate to handle primitive raiding forces." Through the pod's small viewport, watched as the galactic fleet engaged the approaching enemy vessels. The first exchange of fire was spectacular, with brilliant energy beams crisscrossing the void while defensive shields sparked and flared under impact. The galactic fighters moved with practiced precision, their advanced targeting systems locking onto enemy vessels with computerized efficiency. But something was wrong with the engagement pattern. Had studied enough tactical reports to recognize when a battle was not proceeding according to plan. The Devourer ships were not behaving like typical raiders. Instead of hit-and-run attacks focused on specific targets, they were maintaining formation integrity while systematically probing the galactic defensive positions. "They are learning," said quietly, more to himself than to his fellow passengers. But Dr. Martinez heard him and leaned closer to the viewport, her expression becoming more serious as she observed the battle's progression. "Learning what?" she asked, though something in her tone suggested she might already understand his concern. Our tactics, the Devourers are not trying to win this engagement. They are studying how we fight, mapping our response patterns and defensive capabilities. Pointed toward a group of enemy vessels that had broken off from the main formation. Look at those 3 ships on the outer perimeter. They are not engaging our fighters directly. They are recording everything. The pilot overheard their conversation, and his compound eyes swiveled toward them with obvious confusion. Impossible. Primitive raiders lack the technological sophistication for such analysis. Our intelligence reports confirm that Devourer vessels are crude constructions with minimal sensor arrays. As if to contradict the pilot's confident assessment, the battle outside took a sudden and dramatic turn. The Devourer fleet executed a coordinated maneuver that caught the Galactic defenders completely off guard, splitting into multiple attack groups that approached from unexpected vectors while maintaining perfect communication coordination. "How are they doing that?" Dr. Martinez whispered, watching as enemy vessels moved with mechanical precision despite being scattered across thousands of kilometers of space. That level of coordination requires instantaneous communication across the entire fleet. Felt a cold knot forming in his stomach as he recognized the tactical pattern. He had seen similar maneuvers during his years of military service, though never executed with such flawless timing by an enemy force. The Devourers were not just learning from this battle. They were demonstrating capabilities that intelligence reports had completely failed to identify. The station's defensive batteries opened fire on the approaching enemy vessels, sending massive energy beams streaking across the void. Several Devourer ships disappeared in brilliant explosions as the powerful weapons found their targets, but the remaining vessels continued their approach without any apparent concern for their losses. "Confirmed kills on 6 enemy vessels," announced the pilot, his confidence returning as he relayed status updates from the station's command center. "Our defensive systems are performing exactly as designed. The remaining raiders will be eliminated within the next few minutes." But noticed something that made his blood run cold. The destroyed Devourer vessels had all been positioned on the outer edges of the formation, and their destruction had revealed the main enemy force advancing in a complex spiral pattern that was somehow avoiding the station's most powerful defensive weapons. They sacrificed those ships, he realized aloud. The Devourers used their own vessels as decoys while the main force identified blind spots in our defensive coverage. The pilot's antennae twitched with annoyance at the humans' continued negativity. "Honored passenger, please remain calm. Panic serves no purpose during military operations. Our commanders are highly trained professionals with access to the most advanced tactical systems in the galaxy." Through the evacuation pod's communication system, they could hear fragments of radio chatter from the ongoing battle. Galactic fighter pilots reported successful engagements and confirmed enemy casualties, but underneath the professional military jargon, detected a growing note of concern among the squadron leaders. "Blue Leader to command, we are observing unusual enemy movement patterns. Request permission to modify attack vectors." "Command to Blue Leader, maintain current approach. Enemy vessels are operating within predicted parameters." "Blue Leader to command, respectfully disagree. These ships are not behaving like typical raiders. They are avoiding our best pilots and targeting our squadron members specifically." Dr. Martinez gripped the armrest of her seat as the evacuation pod shuddered slightly from a nearby explosion. The battle was moving closer to the station, which meant either the Galactic defenders were falling back or the enemy had found a way through their initial defensive perimeter. "Pilot, how long until we reach the designated safe zone?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the obvious concern in her expression. The checked his navigation display, and his compound eyes reflected confusion as he processed the readings. "There appears to be some interference with our evacuation route guidance system. We may need to extend our flight path to avoid the combat zone." Looked out at the ongoing battle and felt his soldiers' instincts stirring with increasing urgency. The Devourer fleet was not behaving like any enemy force described in the intelligence briefings he had reviewed. These ships moved with purpose and coordination that suggested extensive training and sophisticated command structure. More troubling was the way they seemed to anticipate galactic tactical responses. Every time the defenders attempted a flanking maneuver or coordinated attack, The enemy was already repositioning to counter the threat. It was as if they had fought galactic forces before and learned from every engagement. "How many colonies have the Devourers hit in the past 6 months?" asked the pilot, who consulted his mission briefing database with obvious reluctance. 17 confirmed raids, with estimated material losses exceeding 40 billion credits. However, casualty reports have been surprisingly light, with most raids focused on infrastructure destruction rather than population centers. "Because they were not trying to kill people," said grimly. "They were studying our defensive procedures and response times. Every raid was a training exercise designed to prepare them for a major engagement like this one." The pilot's antennae drooped as he processed this possibility, but before he could respond, new alarms began sounding throughout the evacuation pod. Emergency lights bathed the interior in red illumination, while automated systems announced incoming threats to all passengers. "Warning, multiple hostile contacts approaching evacuation corridor. All pods prepare for emergency maneuvers." Through the viewport, could see Devourer fighters breaking through the galactic defensive lines with shocking speed and agility. These smaller vessels moved unlike anything he had seen in the tactical reports, executing impossible turns and acceleration patterns that should have been beyond their technological capabilities. But most disturbing of all was their obvious focus on the evacuation pods rather than the military vessels that were desperately trying to intercept them. The Devourers were not just attacking the station. They were systematically hunting down every civilian transport that was attempting to reach safety. "They want prisoners," realized, his hand instinctively moving toward the metal tag hidden beneath his civilian clothes. "The Devourers are not here to destroy the station. They are here to capture representatives from every galactic species for interrogation and study." The pilot's compound eyes went wide with terror as this possibility sank. The evacuation pod shuddered violently as the Devourer tractor beam locked onto their hull, dragging them inexorably toward the enemy vessel despite the pilot's desperate attempts to break free. Warning lights flashed throughout the small passenger compartment, while automated systems frantically tried to restore navigation control. "Engines are not responding," the pilot reported, his compound eyes reflecting the red emergency illumination as he worked frantically at his control panel. "The enemy beam is overriding our propulsion systems completely." Through the viewport, watched as other evacuation pods suffered the same fate, their escape routes cut off by precisely coordinated Devourer attack squadrons. The enemy fighters moved with mechanical precision, herding civilian transports like sheep while systematically dismantling the galactic military forces that tried to protect them. Dr. Martinez gripped her seat restraints as another violent shudder ran through their pod. How is this possible? The intelligence briefing said Devourer technology was primitive compared to galactic standard equipment. Studied the enemy vessel that was pulling them closer, nodding details that contradicted everything he had read in the official reports. The ship's hull showed sophisticated armor plating and weapon mounting points that spoke of advanced engineering capabilities. More importantly, the coordination between multiple enemy units demonstrated communication technology far beyond what primitive raiders should possess. "The intelligence was wrong," he said grimly, watching as galactic fighters were systematically outmaneuvered and destroyed by enemy vessels that should have been inferior in every measurable category. "The Devourers have been hiding their true capabilities while they studied our tactics and technology." On the main tactical display that the pilot had activated for passenger information, could see the broader scope of the battle unfolding around Station Omega-7. What had begun as a standard defensive action against raiders was rapidly becoming a complete rout of galactic forces. Enemy squadrons were operating with flawless coordination, while their commanders demonstrated intimate knowledge of galactic military doctrine. "Blue Squadron is taking heavy casualties," reported a distressed voice over the communication channel. "Enemy vessels are anticipating our attack patterns and positioning defensive screens exactly where our tactical manual says they should be weakest. Gold Leader to command, we need immediate reinforcement. These are not the same ships we encountered in previous raids. Enemy capabilities have been significantly underestimated." The pilot tried to establish communication with Station Omega-7's command center, but his transmission was met with static and fragmented responses that suggested the enemy was actively jamming galactic communication frequencies. What few messages came through painted a picture of confusion and growing desperation among the defending forces. Looked around at his fellow passengers and saw the same recognition dawning in their faces. The elderly agricultural researcher was quietly checking his emergency medical kit, while Dr. Martinez was reviewing what appeared to be classified data files on her personal tablet. Even the civilian trade negotiators had abandoned their briefcases and were discussing escape procedures in hushed voices. "We are going to be captured," stated Thomas, a human mining engineer who had been touring the station's resource processing facilities. His voice was steady despite the obvious gravity of their situation. "The question is what we do about it." The pilot turned in his seat to address the human passengers, his antennae drooping with defeat. "I must inform you that this evacuation pod carries no defensive systems. We are completely helpless against enemy boarding parties." Felt the familiar weight of the metal tag beneath his civilian clothes and knew that helplessness was not an option. He had spent too many years in situations exactly like this to accept defeat without a fight. But revealing his true background would change everything about how these people saw him, and there might not be any way back to his carefully constructed diplomatic identity. "How many devourers are we talking about?" he asked the pilot, who consulted his sensor readings with obvious reluctance. "The vessel pulling us in appears to be a heavy cruiser with crew complement estimated between 300 and 500 individuals. However, we have no reliable intelligence about devourer biology or combat capabilities." Through the viewport, could see the enemy ship's docking bay opening to receive their captured pod. The interior was illuminated by harsh blue lighting that revealed rows of other captured vessels from various galactic species. Dozens of evacuation pods and small transport ships were already secured in the bay, suggesting that the devourers had been systematically hunting down civilian targets throughout the battle. "They are collecting specimens," Dr. Martinez observed, her scientific training allowing her to remain analytically focused despite their dire circumstances. "Each pod contains representatives from different galactic species. The devourers are building a comprehensive database of galactic biology and technology." The implication was chilling. If the enemy was capturing representatives from every species, they were planning something much more significant than simple raiding operations. This level of intelligence gathering suggested preparation for a major military campaign against galactic civilization itself. Their pod settled onto the enemy docking bay deck with a solid thunk, followed immediately by the sound of mechanical clamps securing their vessel in place. Through the hull, they could hear the hiss of atmospheric processors equalizing pressure between the ship's environment and their pod's life support system. "Atmospheric analysis indicates breathable environment for most galactic species," the pilot reported, though his voice carried little comfort. "The enemy appears to be maintaining standard environmental protocols." Unbuckled his restraints and moved toward the pod's emergency equipment locker, where basic survival supplies were stored according to galactic safety regulations. His movements were careful and deliberate, drawing on years of training that his fellow passengers could not possibly suspect. "What are you doing?" Thomas asked, watching as the diplomat methodically checked the contents of the emergency kit. "Looking for anything that might be useful if we need to defend ourselves," replied, selecting a few items that could potentially serve as improvised weapons. "Medical scanners can be modified into flashbang devices. Emergency flares burn hot enough to damage unprotected electronics." The pilot stared at him with obvious confusion. "Honored passenger, surely you do not intend to resist capture. Such action would only provoke the enemy into violent retaliation." Before could respond, heavy footsteps echoed through the docking bay outside their pod, followed by mechanical sounds that suggested boarding equipment being positioned around their vessel. The devourers were preparing to enter their pod, and whatever happened next would determine whether any of them survived the encounter. Dr. Martinez moved closer to, speaking in a low voice that would not carry to the other passengers. "You are not really a trade negotiator, are you?" Met her eyes and saw intelligence there that reminded him of the best officers he had served alongside during his military career. "Right now, I am whatever these people need me to be, but you are correct that my background includes more than diplomatic training." Heavy impacts against the pod's hull indicated that the enemy was beginning their boarding operation. Through the thick, transparent aluminum of their viewport, could see figures moving in the harsh blue lighting of the docking bay. The Devourers wore environmental suits that obscured their features, but their movements suggested humanoid physiology adapted for low-gravity environments. "They are coming in through the primary airlock," the pilot reported unnecessarily, as everyone could hear the mechanical sounds of cutting tools working on the pod's external seals. Estimated time to breach is approximately 3 minutes. Made a decision that would change everything about his carefully maintained cover identity. He reached beneath his civilian clothes and pulled out the metal tag that he had carried through more combat zones than any of these people could imagine. The simple piece of metal caught the pod's emergency lighting and revealed markings that identified him as something very different from a trade negotiator. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice taking on a tone of command that made everyone in the pod immediately focus on his words. "When that airlock opens, everyone stays calm and follows my instructions exactly. Do not speak unless spoken to, do not make any sudden movements, and do not try to be heroes." Thomas stared at the dog tag in his hand, reading the markings that identified military service with units that were legendary throughout human space. "Holy hell, you are you not? From the Sirius campaign." Dr. Martinez drew in a sharp breath as she recognized the name and its significance. Even civilian academics knew the stories about human military operations that had become legends throughout the outer colonies. The battle for Sirius had been studied in military academies across a dozen species as an example of tactical innovation under impossible odds. The pilot's compound eyes reflected confusion as he processed this new information. "I do not understand. The passenger manifest identifies you as a civilian diplomatic representative." "That is what I am now," replied, checking the modified emergency equipment he had prepared. "But before I became a diplomat, I spent 15 years teaching various alien species why underestimating human military capabilities is a fatal mistake." The cutting sounds from the airlock suddenly stopped, followed by a moment of ominous silence that made everyone in the pod hold their breath. Then the heavy seal gave way with a metallic screech, and the first Devourer boarding party began entering their captured vessel. The first Devourer to enter the pod was massive, standing nearly as tall as a warrior, but moving with fluid grace that spoke of predatory evolution. Its environmental suit was sleek black metal that reflected the pod's emergency lighting, while its helmet featured a transparent faceplate that revealed features that were disturbingly familiar yet alien. Stood calmly in the center of the pod's passenger compartment, his hands visible and empty except for the military dog tag that now hung openly around his neck. The other passengers had pressed themselves against the rear bulkhead, leaving him to face the boarding party alone. The lead Devourer stopped 3 meters away and regarded with what appeared to be genuine curiosity rather than the aggressive hostility he had expected. When it spoke, its voice carried the electronic undertone of a universal translator, but the underlying tone suggested intelligence and careful consideration. "Human diplomat, your reputation precedes you." The simple statement sent a chill through the pod's passenger compartment. Not only did the Devourers possess advanced translation technology, they also had access to detailed intelligence about galactic military personnel. This was not a primitive raiding force stumbling through space. It was a sophisticated enemy that had been preparing for this confrontation far longer than anyone had realized. "I am honored that my service record is known even among your people," replied carefully, maintaining eye contact with the suited figure while his peripheral vision tracked the positions of the other boarding party members. "Though I confess I am curious how you came by such information." The Devourer's helmet tilted slightly, a gesture that somehow conveyed amusement despite the obscured features. "We have been studying galactic military doctrine for many cycles, General. Your tactical innovations during the Sirius campaign were particularly instructive." Dr. Martinez drew in a sharp breath at the title. Had not been a general during his diplomatic assignment, which meant the Devourers had access to classified military records that revealed his true rank and service history. The implications were staggering. "I am currently serving in a civilian capacity," said, though his tone suggested he was fully aware that such distinctions might be meaningless to an enemy force. These passengers are non-combatants engaged in peaceful trade negotiations. Indeed, which makes your presence here quite fortuitous. The lead devourer gestured toward the other members of his boarding party, who began setting up portable equipment that appeared to be sophisticated scanning devices. We had hoped to encounter senior galactic military leadership during this operation. Through the pod's viewport, could see that the battle around Station Omega-7 had reached a critical phase. Galactic defensive positions were collapsing under coordinated enemy attacks, while evacuation routes were systematically cut off by devourer squadrons. The alien defenders who had mocked human military capabilities just hours earlier were now fighting for their lives against an enemy they had completely underestimated. "Your forces appear to be performing well," observed, watching as another galactic cruiser disappeared in a brilliant explosion. "I assume this level of coordination required extensive preparation." The devourer followed his gaze toward the ongoing battle, and something in its posture suggested satisfaction with the tactical situation. 17 raids against galactic positions provided excellent opportunities to study your defensive procedures and response protocols. Each engagement taught us more about galactic military thinking. The admission confirmed earlier analysis, but hearing it stated so openly was deeply disturbing. The devourers had been systematically intelligence gathering for months, using each raid to build a comprehensive understanding of galactic military capabilities while hiding their own technological sophistication. "An impressive strategic deception," acknowledged, "though I suspect your true objectives extend beyond simple military conquest." "Quite perceptive, General. We seek something far more valuable than territory or resources." The devourer's attention shifted to the other passengers, who were listening to the conversation with expressions of growing terror. "Knowledge, understanding, the biological and technological diversity represented by galactic civilization." Dr. Martinez stepped forward despite the obvious danger, her scientific curiosity overcoming her fear as she processed the implications of the enemy's statement. "You are conducting research on a galactic scale, but why capture specimens when you could simply observe from a distance?" The lead devourer turned toward her and could sense its interest in her question. "Because observation alone cannot provide the depth of understanding required for our purposes, Dr. Martinez. We need to comprehend how each species thinks, how they solve problems, how they respond to stress and crisis." The fact that it knew her name and background sent another chill through the passenger compartment. The devourers were not just capturing random civilians, they had specifically targeted individuals with particular expertise and knowledge. This was a carefully planned intelligence operation disguised as a military raid. "What happens to the specimens after you have finished studying them?" Thomas asked, though his voice suggested he already suspected the answer would not be reassuring. "That depends largely on their cooperation and the value of the information they provide." The devourer's helmet turned back toward. "Some individuals possess knowledge that makes them far too valuable to discard." Felt the weight of command settling onto his shoulders like a familiar cloak, despite his current civilian status. These people were looking to him for leadership and protection, and his military training would not allow him to fail them regardless of the personal cost. "What exactly do you want from me?" he asked directly. "Your expertise in asymmetric warfare and tactical innovation. The Sirius campaign demonstrated human ability to achieve victory against overwhelming odds through creative problem-solving and adaptive strategy." The devourer gestured toward portable holographic equipment that its subordinates had activated. "We would like you to review several tactical scenarios and provide your analysis." The request was not what it expected, and something about the situation felt wrong in ways he could not immediately identify. Enemy forces did not typically ask for voluntary cooperation from captured military officers, especially not in the middle of an ongoing battle. "And if I refuse, then your fellow passengers will serve as motivation for reconsideration." The threat was delivered in the same calm tone, but its meaning was unmistakable. "However, we believe you will find our proposal more interesting than simple coercion." The holographic displays activated, showing detailed tactical situations that recognized from historical battles throughout galactic space. But these were not random scenarios. They were specific engagements where human military forces had achieved decisive victories against alien opponents who possessed superior technology and numbers. These battles all feature human tactical innovation overcoming technological disadvantage, observed, studying the complex data presentations. You are trying to understand how humans consistently defeat supposedly superior opponents. Precisely, other galactic species rely heavily on technological solutions and predetermined tactical doctrine. Humans demonstrate remarkable ability to improvise and adapt under pressure. The Devourer's voice carried what sounded like genuine admiration. This flexibility represents a significant strategic advantage that we need to understand. Realized that he was looking at the real purpose behind the Devourer raids and intelligence gathering. They were not simply studying galactic military capabilities. They were trying to decode the specific advantages that made human forces so effective despite their apparent technological limitations. "You are preparing for a war against someone else," he said, pieces of the puzzle clicking together in his mind. "The galactic powers are not your primary target. You need to understand human tactics because you are facing an enemy that fights like humans do." The lead Devourer's posture shifted in what interpreted as surprise, confirming his analysis. Around them, the sounds of battle were growing closer as the engagement moved toward the station's core facilities. Through the viewport, he could see galactic fighters making desperate attacks against enemy positions while their defensive formations crumbled under coordinated assault. But now understood that this entire battle was secondary to the Devourer's real objectives. They were harvesting intelligence about human military thinking because somewhere in the galaxy, they faced an opponent that could not be defeated through conventional technological superiority. Studied the holographic tactical displays for several minutes, his experienced mind analyzing the battle scenarios while simultaneously assessing his current situation. The Devourers waited patiently for his response, but he could sense growing tension among his fellow passengers as the reality of their predicament became increasingly clear. These scenarios are all defensive engagements where human forces were significantly outnumbered, he finally said, pointing to specific elements within the tactical presentations. But you are missing the most important factor in each victory. The lead Devourer leaned forward with obvious interest. Please elaborate, General. Morale, unit cohesion, the willingness to sacrifice individual survival for collective objectives. Gestured toward the ongoing battle visible through the viewport. Your analysis focuses on tactical maneuvers and resource allocation, but it ignores the psychological factors that determine whether soldiers fight or flee when facing impossible odds. The Devourer's helmet tilted as it processed this information. We have observed that human forces demonstrate unusual resilience under extreme stress. However, we assumed this was simply a result of superior training protocols. Training helps, but it cannot create the fundamental motivation that drives human military effectiveness. Moved to the viewport and pointed toward a cluster of galactic fighters that were making a suicidal attack run against a vastly superior enemy formation. Look at those pilots. They know they cannot win this engagement, but they are still fighting because they believe their sacrifice might save others. Dr. Martinez stepped closer to the tactical displays, her scientific background allowing her to recognize patterns that others might miss. The human victories all occurred when individual units exceeded their theoretical performance parameters, but that kind of performance cannot be programmed or manufactured artificially. Correct, which means your enemy faces the same challenge you do. Turned back to face the lead Devourer, his tactical mind racing through implications and possibilities. Whoever you are really fighting has learned to replicate human psychological advantages, not just human tactical methods. The admission that there was indeed another enemy sent a ripple of shock through the Devourer boarding party. Their leader remained silent for a long moment, clearly weighing how much information to reveal to their captive audience. The entities we face call themselves the Architects, it finally said. They have been systematically destroying civilizations throughout this galactic sector, but their methods defy conventional military logic. They turn defeated populations into willing servants rather than enslaving them through force. Thomas spoke up from his position near the rear bulkhead. Psychological warfare on a species-wide scale. They break the will to resist rather than simply overpowering defensive forces. Precisely, Traditional military superiority means nothing against an enemy that can convince your own soldiers to surrender voluntarily. The Devourer's voice carried a note of frustration that suggested personal experience with such defeats. We have lost entire fleets because crews simply stopped fighting and offered to join the Architect forces. Felt pieces of a much larger puzzle clicking together in his mind. The Devourers were not invaders. They were refugees fleeing from an enemy that had perfected psychological manipulation as a weapon of war. Their raids against galactic positions had been desperate attempts to find tactical solutions that could counter mind control technology. "How long have you been fighting the Architects?" he asked. 43 cycles. We have been forced to abandon 7 star systems and retreat deeper into this galactic region. The Devourer's posture reflected the weariness of a prolonged conflict against impossible odds. Our traditional military doctrine proved completely ineffective against their conversion techniques. Dr. Martinez was studying the tactical displays with growing excitement as patterns emerged from the data. But human forces have never been defeated through psychological manipulation during these historical battles. There must be something inherent in human psychology that provides resistance to mental influence. That is our hypothesis as well. Human military units demonstrate remarkable immunity to morale-based attacks and psychological warfare techniques. The lead Devourer gestured toward, which is why your tactical insights are so valuable to our survival efforts. Through the viewport, could see that the battle around Station Omega-7 was entering its final phase. Galactic defensive positions had completely collapsed, and Devourer forces were systematically capturing rather than destroying the remaining installations. But now he understood that this was not conquest, it was evacuation preparation. "You are not planning to hold this territory," he realized. "This entire operation is designed to gather intelligence before you retreat to another fallback position. The Architects will arrive in this sector within 10 cycles," the Devourer confirmed. "We needed to understand galactic military capabilities before deciding whether this region could provide a defensible position against their advance." The implications were staggering. An enemy force capable of psychological conversion was advancing through galactic space, and the Devourers represented the last organized resistance against total destruction. The galactic powers who had mocked human military capabilities were about to face an opponent that made technological superiority meaningless. Made a decision that would fundamentally change the strategic situation for everyone involved. "I will provide you with the tactical analysis you need, but I have conditions." The lead Devourer's posture suggested wariness at this unexpected negotiation. "You are hardly in a position to make demands, General." "Actually, I am in the perfect position," smiled grimly. "You need human insights to survive the Architect advance, and I am the best tactical analyst you are likely to capture. But I will not cooperate unless my conditions are met." Dr. Martinez watched this exchange with growing understanding of the strategic implications. The balance of power in their small prisoner group had just shifted dramatically as the enemy realized they needed more than he needed them. "State your conditions," the Devourer said after a long pause. "First, all captured galactic personnel are to be treated as military refugees rather than prisoners. Second, you share your intelligence about Architect capabilities with Galactic Command before you retreat from this sector." His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to negotiating life-and-death decisions. "And third, you allow me to establish contact with Human Military Command to coordinate joint defensive preparations." The Devourer leader consulted with its subordinates through what appeared to be internal communication systems, their conversation conducted in frequencies beyond human hearing range. When the discussion concluded, it turned back to with what might have been grudging respect. "Your conditions are acceptable, with modifications. Galactic Command will receive Architect intelligence data, but human military units will be invited to join our retreat to defensible positions rather than attempting to hold this sector." "Agreed. Now show me everything you know about Architect conversion techniques, and I will teach you how humans have learned to fight enemies who should be impossible to defeat." As the two military leaders began sharing intelligence that could determine the survival of multiple civilizations, the other passengers realized they were witnessing the beginning of an alliance that would reshape the entire balance of power in their part of the galaxy. Through the viewport, the last galactic fighters were surrendering to Devourer forces. But instead of ending in conquest, the battle was becoming the first step toward a desperate joint defense against an enemy that neither side could face alone. The human diplomat who had been dismissed and mocked by alien soldiers just hours earlier was now planning the strategic defense of galactic civilization against psychological weapons that turned conventional military thinking into a fatal liability. The Devourers had laughed at humanity's primitive tactics and inferior technology, but they were about to discover why humans had earned their reputation as the galaxy's most dangerous opponents when fighting for survival against impossible odds. The question was whether that knowledge could somehow be turned to humanity's advantage, even from inside an enemy prison ship surrounded by the wreckage of galactic civilization's most advanced military installation. Stepped forward to meet them, the dog tag hanging openly around his neck as he prepared to discover whether his reputation had reached even this remote corner of the galaxy. Behind him, his fellow passengers watched with a mixture of terror and dawning hope as they realized their seemingly helpless situation had just become considerably more complicated. But before anyone could respond, their evacuation pod was caught in a powerful tractor beam that began dragging them toward the largest of the approaching enemy vessels. As he walked through the corridors, absently touched the metal tag hanging beneath his civilian clothes, feeling its familiar weight against his chest. The simple piece of metal had traveled with him through more conflicts than he cared to remember, and old instincts were already stirring as the sound of battle preparations echoed through Station Omega 7.